and welcome back to another edition of Metcalf's Movie Journal. This is the show where I do quick reviews for the movies that I watch, give them a score out of 10, and then add them to my list. So let's see what movie we're reviewing today. On March 30th, I watched Time Trap, which came out in 2017. And at its most basic, this was almost an interesting enough idea for a movie, with a group of students out searching for their lost professor in a cave that has some very strange temporal properties. Namely that time seems to pass much more slowly for those inside the cave than out. In the end, though, this movie proves that a neat idea is never enough on its own, and to actually tell a good story does require a certain amount of skill. The characters, defined by their dialogue and decision-making, are easily some of the stupidest I can remember seeing in a movie. The big reveal that time moves slower inside the cave than out should have been a startling moment for the audience and characters alike. But there's so many pieces of evidence made available, from the light flashing above their heads that should have been a steady day's light, to the rapidly deteriorating rope they used to rappel into the cave, to people literally aging right in front of them when they're on the other side of the cave's effect, that by the time the characters figure out what's happening, you've probably been yelling at your screen for almost an hour. If characters are being written effectively, it should feel like multiple different personalities all interacting with and affecting the way the story plays out, through their different choices and actions. But the only character that even begins to feel like a real person in all this was Furby, played by Max Wright. But even there, he only feels slightly more authentic when compared to the others. And he still has almost no impact on how the story plays out. The entire thing feels very much like the characters being pulled along the rails of the story by the writer, as opposed to the way a great story will feel like it's unfolding in a much more natural way. It genuinely feels like the characters are just along for the ride, and there never seemed to be any other way for things to go, since nobody was ever going to be smart enough to even realize what was happening to them, let alone come up with a plan to deal with it. This was clearly a low-budget affair, with not a single recognizable actor in the bunch, but one of the main leading female roles of Kara was played by Cassidy Gifford, and I only mention her specifically because it really feels like she just got the role for her looks, because somehow she manages to stand out among a group of less talented actors as the least talented in the group. But there's just so many different and better sci-fi mystery movies to compare this to, and even some of the lower-rated ones on my list like Coherence, Vivarium, or Predestination, all at least had characters I could relate to in some way, as they struggled to solve the puzzle. But here the characters are even more frustratingly stupid than a standard slasher horror film. And in the last review I did, I spoke about The Highwaymen, and how that movie had good acting but a boring story. And whereas here, with Time Trap, it's an example of bad acting but an interesting story. And even though I usually consider writing to be the most important aspect of a film, I still rate The Highwaymen higher than this one. I think even the most amateur movie watcher would be able to recognize all the problems with this one. And even if you never seem to be able to grasp sci-fi movies, or you're just always wrong when you try to guess at a movie's ending, I still think you'll be able to figure this one out. The most annoying part of this movie for me is definitely the characters though, because they basically need the entire plot spelled out for them in plain black and white before they realize what's going on. So don't be surprised if you're screaming at your screen before this one ends. I know I was. Overall, it was just too safe and predictable, which sucks all the more because it could have been an interesting story based on the initial setup. At its best, it probably could have been on par with the likes of something like the original Cube movie, but it never even begins to come close to that potential. I guess the ending was supposed to be the one big shocking moment in the movie, but even that didn't hit the way it was clearly supposed to, because by that point, there really wasn't any other way to end it. It's hard to find anything good to say about this one, but I still appreciate movies that try to tell a new and unique story, so any points I give this one will be based on that effort, and not so much the results. I ended up giving it a 3 out of 10, and it landed at number 1,343 on my list, putting it right here, in between Anaconda and The Program. And as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for watching another edition of Metcalf's Movie Journal. Be sure to click like and subscribe for new videos every week. And if you have a movie that you really want me to watch, be sure to drop me a comment.